an emotionally painful response to loss. There are many ways that people grieve their losses, and there are many types of losses for which people grieve. However, the more significant the loss, the more intense the grief experience. For example, the loss of a loved one, which is one of life's greatest stressors. Welcome to Uncovering My Voice, the Christian Women Talk Show, where we listen to your story. Individuals who experience an important death navigate through what we call an intense acute grief. This lessens with time as they manage to, successfully adapt to the loss over time. And the grief progresses from an acute to a more integrated form where, they seemingly function at pre-loss status. However, on the other hand, studies show that approximately 10% of persons with an important death will develop what is known as a prolonged grief condition. This is especially common in individuals who have lost more than one loved one and who may experience this acute grief differently for each death. And depending on a variety of factors, this might look different. So there is the relationship that comes to play, the relationship of the person who, died, and there is religion, and then there is cultural influences. So for these persons, there might be a period of what we call reduced engagement, where they do not function as pre-loss and they stop engaging in activities that they used to engage in prior to the loss. How do we as Christian women navigate this grieving process? So that's what we're here to talk about today. So today I have with me two beautiful ladies, and for the first time in Uncovering My Voice, a gentleman. Ladies and gentlemen, man, welcome to Uncovering My Voice. I'm so glad you took the time out to come and have this conversation with me today. And I look forward to hearing from you all the stories that you have. I'm going to introduce you, and then I'm going to allow you to just give our viewers a little bit more about who you are. So we have right here Debbie Barrett-Peters, and then we have Elise Beckles, and then we have Montie Thomas. And I'm your host, Corinne Wheeler-Thomas. Debbie.
Debbie Ann, a mother, a wife, and I lost a mom. That would be 4 years now, heading into its 5th year. We were not under the same roof at the time, but we were in the same community. So we were very close, and close is not even a strong word to say the connection. We were very, 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 very tight. Yes. So as you say, it's a process, and we are going through, there's siblings involved, there's extended family and so on. And I think one of the big things was entering into my marriage, knowing that my husband had also lost his mom, and that was sort of like an avenue of sympathy on both sides of the spectrum to say, okay, how did you go through that? He experienced his at an earlier age, whereas I was already in my early 30s at the time. and with a child. So for me, this whole process is like a testimony. It's not necessarily a grief with suffering and a challenge with getting back on your feet. It's all a process, yes, and we all experience it differently, but I also capitalize on the testimony aspect. And I guess we'll go through that as we
For sure. Okay, Elise.
All right, so my name is Elise Beckles. I'm an entrepreneur, owner of my own tutoring business, friend, sister, daughter. I'm sure other things that others can maybe attest to, but that's my little synopsis. And yes, so similar to Debbie, I lost my mom in 2009, and a process that I still walk through, and I know that today we will go through just the ebbs and flows of what that looks like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My name is Montie Thomas, and I'm the father of 3 boys and a husband, and also an entrepreneur. And looking forward to share some of my experiences regarding the loss of
All
our
right.
firstborn.
All right, so before we get into it, I just want to invite you to subscribe to my channel, like this conversation. For sure, tell us what your story is, put it in the comments, and share with a friend. All right. So ladies and gentlemen, I have to get used to saying ladies and gentlemen because I'm used to saying ladies. And I'm gonna try to remember, and please forgive me if I forget. So my first question is, give us a little bit about what happened and how did you get up next day to just get going the next day? What was that like for you the next day, the day after, or that day after could go on to be the week after, the month after? How did it work for you?
Well, mom was unexpected illness. She had pancreatic cancer, and she had, maybe let's say the diagnosis happened in April, and before that, let's say December, we all had a family gathering. And looking back on the photos now of that gathering, it's like, where did this come from? Because she never exhibited anything that said there was a physical challenge going on inside. Chirpy, everything. There was no weight loss. There was no sense of pain, anything. And then we come into February the following year, and it's like, why do I have this constant pain when I'm eating? And it's just uncomfortable. But you tolerate it because if you have a very high threshold with pain, sometimes you just put it in the back of your mind, not necessarily acting on it. And then she went to the doctor, did all her testing, everything came back negative. And I'm thinking the patient still has symptoms, so you can't just leave it as a stereotypic, okay, maybe it's diabetes. She's not diabetic. Whether or not there's a family history or anything, it wasn't on her file as a risk factor of sorts. And I'm thinking, time goes on, person goes to vacation, and it just drags out, but the patient is still symptomatic. So what are we going to do? And
She's in the medical field, okay? So she's talking about her mom. She's calling her mom the patient. So Debbie is in the medical field. What do you do, Debbie?
My background is medical laboratory technologist.
Okay.
So I encounter sampling, testing, analysis of body fluids and so on. And so I said to mom, listen, healthcare is free.
Yes.
Let us go to the Emerge because
we're in Canada. Yeah.
You're still having pains, and there's no sense complaining. And the doctor, in his mind, has done everything. Let's go to the Emerge and see. One thing the doctor didn't do at this point was imaging. There's no abdominal imaging. So we went. Of course, ours, they did X-ray, they did ultrasound, but it was more on the abdomen Not, it wasn't abdomen, it was more looking at the aorta for any aneurysm that might cause abdominal pain. And the doctor came out, and I remember him specifically saying, Mrs. Barrett, right now you are not an emergency. How can I help you? And I said, I would like you to write me a requisition for an ultrasound, an abdominal ultrasound. And he said, I can do that for you. And he did. We were in the hospital. We walked over to diagnostic imaging. We booked. This is now, let's say, 3 o'clock a.m. We got an appointment for 7:30 a.m. I said, Mom, go home. Let's come back right away. And from that time, it was the appointment for the ultrasound, then it was CT, then it was biopsy and diagnosis within 24 hours.
Wow.
And we took 2 months to have a perfect bill of health with a general physician, because he, in my opinion, did not look at imaging, and it was all there. So with all that said, having an advocate just to lean on, somebody to hear you, you might feel like you are, it's nothing significant, but to advocate for someone because they're seeing with another eye. Sometimes they say 2 heads are better than one. With this whole process medically, it was not a good news that you want to hear, because okay, people have cancer or they might have any other sickness, and you're thinking, this person have overcome, there's research going on, there's results, and then bam, you end up with the one that's not treatable, right? And it's funny because I remember my sister, we didn't tell her right away off the bat. She was in grade 11 at this point, and Mom was just concerned that it's too early in her last few months of that school term, so we kind of held off. She knows she was ill, but not to the extent of pancreatic cancer. And when she finally found out, she said, well, why not just remove it? As in, let's do a transplant. And I'm thinking, that's not a bad suggestion, but it's the one we can't do a transplant for. It's the one we can't do a surgery to cut out a piece for. It's just that one that we're told, yeah, we're just going to write it out.
There's just one and you can do nothing about it.
And so I remember when we got that diagnosis of sorts, right away, I was in my condo, and I just went to the sliding door. It was at night now, so I'm looking out, and I said, Lord, lest I say to myself that I know it all because of whatever experience I have in the medical field, how are we going to proceed with this? And right then and there, I was impressed with a scripture that said, obey your parents in the Lord, for it is right. There's 2, but that one always comes to mind. I can't remember the other one, but it was as if to say, whatever your mom says, listen. Don't impose. Your role is not to fix, just obey. And throughout the process, I've always tried to maintain the fact that if she's in her right sound mind, then the Holy Spirit's talking. So don't try to override or force or impress that it has to be this way because we are younger and we have information that you might not have access to. The Lord said, obey. And I have taken it from that time, and this was like, in the early phases. So there's a whole realm in, what happens next. But just to cap this all off, I think the help was there from Mom with Ophelia, and then it redirected me now when she was buried to say, this is now where your energy is going to be focused on, raising your child. Because I think if she wasn't there, then I would always slip back into what it could have been, what we hadn't, Mom's biggest goal within a year or 2 of that happening was to go into early retirement and take care of her grandkids. That was her biggest thing. Like, I don't have to sit here till I'm 60. She was 53 at the time. Wow. And so she looked forward. She already had a grandson from my brother, and they were expecting. And so this was like It's like a no-brainer in her mind. So I think if that wasn't the situation for me in terms of having a child to redirect my focus, it would have caused me to always look back in the what if, what could it have been, sort of a transition. So
Wow.
very broad.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's hear from Elise. Yeah.
Sure. So the question is, how did we get up the next morning? Right?
Yeah. But you take it wherever you want to take it.
Yeah, so I don't know how I got up the next morning. I just know I was up and there were always people at home. So my story is a little bit different in that my mom was diagnosed with breast cancer in 2006, passed away in 2009, but had gone into remission prior to that. So even within the course of the illness, it was a up and down and then a stability that
No, yeah.
I exhaled. Yeah, sigh
like
of relief.
peace of mind, yeah.
Yeah. But obviously, so my story takes place, I was in my early 20s. So it's a different time. Like now I think I would be a little bit more like asking for different resources and let's check this. But I myself wasn't familiar enough
sure.
to know, right? So we ended up, she did treatment here in Canada, and then the cancer came back and it was aggressive. So that's when our family, a family member had recommended that she go to this natural treatment as a last resort out in Seattle, Washington. A faith-based, you know, they do juicing. It
Yes,
was a
I know
really,
about those,
yes. So we're like, as a family, let's sacrifice, let's rally the community and really push for that to happen. So we sent her out there. That's my last time seeing my mom alive when she left here. And a very good friend of mine, her grandma, who's a nurse, was the person on site because you needed someone there to stay with them, right? So she ends up going to that facility and, you know, we were hopeful, but then also it was a faith, like we're just trying all we can sort of thing. So she ended up passing away in Seattle. I will never forget, I was the main contact. My brother and my dad ended up going to Seattle because I know I have a visual memory and they knew at the time, if I see her like that on a breathing machine, I wouldn't be who I am today. So they said, do you want to come? And I was like, I don't know if I can. So they went there. And I'll never forget the doctor, because I was the contact on the spot. The doctor in Seattle called me. I remember I was working at the time, but off and on, always off work, just off and on. And the doctor said to me the words I'll never forget. He said, the cancer has exploded. And I sat in my car, and you just know what it meant. You knew what it meant.
It hit hard.
Hit so hard. And then it was more, this really, I can't even explain to people the feeling of knowing someone is going to pass and almost having to sit
And that's your mom.
So walked through that, you know, had to walk through it with others who were maybe on the ground, doing what they can, but then doing, you know, they're also not the experts on the situation. And my brother, who was on the ground there, he would call me and update me. And then, like, we almost had to reconcile and give my mom permission to go. Because even in the hospital, when they asked her who she wanted to speak to, she couldn't speak. You have a breathing tube. And they had like who do you want to speak to? And she pointed to the letter E.
Elise.
So she just wanted to hear my voice. So I spoke to her and I had to give her permission to go. So that as well, like even thinking back, I'm like, how did I walk through that, right? So being on the ground here and then that happening, and then the day after, it almost feels like a blur. Because so many people are around, they're trying to comfort you. You want to be alone, but then you're like, the doctor there, he had shared that almost the process she was going to, like, because the detox almost, right? So when we weren't hearing such positive things, he was almost saying that was good, because the body is in shock.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
you're gonna go through it before you make it out.
Yeah.
You were very hopeful, yeah.
Exactly. So her being in Seattle wasn't very long. Probably like a matter of weeks.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
That can be shocking.
Yeah.
And do you, looking back, do you ever think about whether or not you made the right choice to not go? Do you wish you had gone? What was
Good
it?
question. I've thought about that very often. I believe what happened at the time was like God knows us, right? So I think even small things, I'll even share this. When my mom was leaving the house that morning to go to the airport, I went to the airport we all went to the airport. She told my brother, and he told me this after the fact, she told him, take care of your sister.
Okay.
And at the time, he was like, what do you mean?
Right, right.
Yeah.
As
What do
if
she knew almost. So I don't regret not going.
Yeah.
I think if this were to happen now in this
For sure.
30s, I would have the capacity. At the time,
And
I don't
I'm
think I
thinking
did.
he's older.
We don't even
He's
know.
older.
Yeah.
We don't even
Yes.
know because, like, you know, it's hard. It doesn't matter what age you are. The passing of your mom does take a heavy toll on you. We're going to go over to Monty to give him an opportunity to tell us about his loss and how he moved on from there.
Okay, well, I'm not a stranger to losses. I lost my mom when I was in high school.
Oh. Okay. What age?
Well, she was probably around about 40 something, or close to 50. We were surprised, but we had to endure it. Then it was on to my nephew, who, you know, lost his life in an accident, tragic, horrible accident. And actually, you know, it broke me. I could not even speak at his funeral service. But to top it all off was the loss of our firstborn, Daniel. You know, Daniel brought probably more sorrow and grief than anything else. Of course, he's our firstborn, but that his experience was avoidable is what probably brings the most grief in the whole process, because you're looking at what might have been, and you know, it's not, you know, people die, but when it could have been avoided,
Yes.
then that's when you really, you know, it really hurts. And so Daniel was dear to me. I don't have favorite kids, but he's one of my favorite kids. And so, you know, he was very closely attached to me.
Yeah.
You know, I could not visualize life without Daniel. And, you know, he probably could not visualize life without me either. We were everywhere, everybody knows that. And, but Daniel, you know, I'd been through a whole lot. You know, I had watched him suffer. That brought grief. It's not only the fact that people die that
True.
grief comes.
Yes.
True.
It's the fact that you have to witness the ordeal that they have to go through. You know, nobody can express themselves.
Right.
You are thinking everything, you know, but you want to make their life
Yeah.
happy. So that takes a toll on you. You know, but because of the love, you don't pay attention to the cost, you know, that it brings to you. You just want that person to recover and to survive. So Daniel went out just before COVID began, walked in the room. You know, I'm always beside Daniel, never leave Daniel. Anywhere I go, he's beside me. And for about 2 hours or so, I left Daniel in the room. And I don't know if the Lord wanted it that way, because I was always challenging God to spare Daniel's life, you know. And somebody said if I had been in the room, he would not have died, because, you know, my faith would probably cling so tenaciously to God that, you know, the Lord could not allow me to go through the grief. I remember once I looked at Daniel. I was trying to get him to walk, exercise. Daniel showed a sign, you know, appeared as if he was just frustrated with life. He was tired. And I went into, you know, behind the corner, and I was like, I said, Jesus, please don't let him die. But I felt something was not right. But I would not share it with anybody. I don't share grief with anybody. In fact, I never tell Daniel that I'm leaving. If I'm going anywhere, I never say goodbye to Daniel.
Okay.
And that's something in my psyche. If at home, in my family, my boys, I don't give bad news to anybody. So if anything will happen, they're gonna find out on their own. But I don't like to share bad news with anybody, because I don't like to see people grieve, because I can enter probably people's feelings very easily. And so, you know, he went inside there, saw him, you know, not for 2 hours he went there, he was out. And he was out. And somehow, you know, God gave us the grace to deal with it. And but talking about overcoming grief, I don't know if we should refer to it as overcoming grief. Neither are we overcome by grief, not overcome by grief, because they have a distinct faith that God resurrects, that God had his firstborn son and his only son, and he sacrificed him for us, and he was resurrected. It gives me a distinct conviction that
I'm glad you touched on that point, Monty, because I want to ask a question about the Christian person and how we deal with grief, because it's a school of thought that, you know, we are Christians. We know that, you know, we must die unless God comes before. So we understand that, but do we have the right to grieve as Christians? Because we know we have to die, and we know we're going to go to heaven and we're going to see each other later on. But how does that resonate with you as a Christian person? Because people looking on want to know, do you have questions? Do you question death? Do you question Christianity? Do you question your faith? And why your family member? How do you deal with this?
Well, as a trained minister, and I also have, you know, worked in the healthcare industry. I do training in healthcare as well. I've seen a lot of people. I'm in the hospital. I see people crying. You never know it's going to reach you until it gets to you.
Until it gets to you, yeah.
I have buried people, you know, in churches. You know, I've been to funerals. I have huge funerals. I've taken people to the cemetery, bury them. You don't know it's going to come on to you. Paul says, that's Paul in the New Testament. He says, if in this life only we have hope, we are as men most miserable. It is to say that, but for the belief in the resurrection, we have every right to be grieved. You know, I don't know anybody who's in their right mind who's not going to experience grief as a result of death. As it relates to grieving process, though, it's not something that we should pursue, or let me say it this way. Even though we are going through an ordeal, we should make every effort not to become to process it in a way where it takes a hold upon us, because grief can cause or also make you a casualty. And for many people today, they're dying because they nourish grief. You can nourish grief. If you reinforce grief through listening to songs and listening to others who are going through the same ordeal, it can resonate with you, and it can destroy you.
It can.
Right? And therefore, it is important to keep the promise of hope uppermost. Paul says, in this life only we have hope, which means that our hope is in Christ Jesus.
Okay.
He's saying essentially, you have every reason to be confident that, you know, God will resurrect your child. Because we have that hope, we do not sorrow like those who have no hope. We look at death. It's punctuated with resurrection. It's punctuated with hope. It's punctuated with assurance.
Okay. Let's hear from Elise and Debbie on that matter. How do you see grief and Christians?
I think if you have a sort of, I think love is what stands out for me in terms of answering that question, because not because someone might not have loved the individual that died, or they inflicted harm in their life for whatever reason that they can't go through the grief, but the love for me is what's going to either make it immediate, how intense, and whether or not you look beyond. Okay, so you know, our moms are, we would imagine, our very next close best friend in our lives. So for that immediate contact to have been stripped away, it's like a right arm. How do you work? Like your body part is missing.
I would say it's like my heart.
Yes. Yes.
It's like when our son died, it's like something came out of my chest. and went away. So I agree. Yeah.
And so from a spiritual perspective, I think we would have had to have that mental talk before. Not to say that you're going to say to the person, now that they've heard a bad news, that we must think about death. But in our general conversation, let's say this was a Sunday and we're trying to gather as friends, have that talk. And so when that moment comes, still talk. Some people are like, I don't want to hear. Yeah, I got the news, it's pancreatic cancer, nobody survives, and you're blocking it out. I think to block it out is to delay how you will go beyond, like what the next day looks like.
Yeah.
And so for my experience, I would encourage others to talk, even if you feel it's not the right time. For example, for me, my brother had experienced this with his mother-in-law the year before, seeing pancreatic cancer. And so in his mind, he's already there to say, we'll do comfort care because it doesn't look good once it's at this stage.
Okay.
But for me, I said, well, mom is spiritually sound, and until I see it's obliterated, I'm hopeful. So I'm not there planning, like mommy always says, you know, at my funeral, do this. So mentally, you know, she's putting out her will together and whatever. Mentally, I'm there with those steps as they come. But I wasn't putting myself at, you're no longer sitting in front of me.
Yeah.
Right? So
You didn't see that picture.
I didn't want to look at that picture, but it's not like I wasn't. I grieved mommy before she passed, but the way I grieved her, she had gone into ICU. She had a GI bleed, and we had to call the ambulance. She went into hospital, and then the night before, the Sunday, so she went in the Friday night, early Saturday morning, straight throughout the day. Let's say this is now midnight, Saturday night, and then the doctor and the surgeons couldn't necessarily come to attend to her, so she was being cared for. And then they called and said, well, let's get your family in here. And it's sort of like one of those things where if they're going to tell you to bring as much close family, then it's like a conversation of what's timeline.
Yeah.
Timeline. And so right then and there, I just let it all out before I got there and while we were there, because their report was, we're giving her 5 days. And it's like, you mean like 5 literal days from today?
It's not like in the Bible where 5 days mean 5 years.
It's no, not a day for a year situation, no. And so when I couldn't have thought about it a few months before, I'm now having to face the reality that it's right at the doorstep, for want of a better word. But there's prayer. She didn't become responsive after that, so she was conscious but no communication. And so even in that sense, it's like the person is here but they're really not here. You can't talk to them, you can't say, okay, how can I comfort you, or can I, like, you're just going on. And she was like that for a good, let's say, 10 days, because after now, up to this point, when she was in the hospital, it's almost as if they said, well, we're not gonna feed her. We're not gonna even fluids to keep the body, because once they did the CT and they did another scan to look at what was happening, it was, and I you know, I'm thankful. Sometimes we get some medical care, medical professionals who are, they don't have no tact. Like, I'm listening to your experience, and to me, you don't know. What if you were driving with that information at that point to say it's exploded? Now you're going to explode on the road, because where do I go from here? You're telling me this over the phone. So the general surgeon, who couldn't have been there the day before, came and walked us through the CT scan. This is a normal, this is what you're looking at. And so we were able to appreciate the extent of how overwhelmingly doubtful they were, sick she was. And so from a spiritual perspective, you have the hope that God is. I kept saying to myself, Lord, this is pancreatic cancer. no one really walks away from this. Are you going to do a miracle through our family? That was the hope I had. Like, I was like, are we going to be that family that you
I think we had a similar situation.
That was the mindset. And so she went from ICU to the cancer floor, didn't have anything. And to the point of saying, when she went into the natural aspect of treatment, the timeline, we had to say to the doctor, well, it's now day 8. And
she's still here.
Not even that she's still here. You need to feed her now because you're ultimately starving her. So they agreed to give her some fluids and so on. We did blood work, and I'm looking at the blood work, and I said, Doc, you need to tell me that we're gonna. It's hopeful. That's all I'm trying to say. It was looking hopeful, although you told us 5 days, and he said, well, the numbers are there, but the cancer is also still there. So the parasite's there. Unless you tell me there's no more parasite, then I can probably have a conversation. But to him, the cancer is there. So the numbers don't mean nothing to me. Anyway.
So I want you to tell us, though. So the grieving part of it.
The grieving for me didn't come as grief because there was a period where there was silence, meaning her not talking and going beyond their time of when they said it would have been done. It was like another 3 weeks. So the idea of not looking and listening to what you're saying because we have a hope. And I'm not trying to say that if that hope is now shut and the Lord said that's it, that it's going to crush me. But in the moment, do I still remain hopeful every day? Every day that I have, what do I make of that day?
And then after.
And when that time comes now, then okay. And so when the day came, and I was physically there when she started to express difficulties breathing and everything, and they pronounced everything, I was right there, and I said, Lord, this is it. This is it. But then it's like a gradual, I experienced her getting into palliative and talking. So there were times when it looked hopeful that the miracle, even if it don't express itself as the cancer leaving, but she's gone through hurdles that they said she wouldn't have. So is that gonna make me crushed? No. You still have that hope. So she spoke, she was up and she was eating, all of that. And then, right? So
I feel like you have a different approach to grieving that is, maybe different because like Elise, how did you do it? What do you think about Christians and grieving? Because Debbie, Montie, they're on a different trajectory in terms of how they feel like Christian persons should grieve. And I'm not saying anything. I'm just saying it's different because I've gone through grieving. It's nothing like what your Montie is saying. But let's see if Elise has a different perspective on how we can navigate this.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Christians, I don't even know if Christians know how to support people through grief. That's my experience in the age I dealt with this. I found myself very removed. I didn't want to be at church because that was overwhelming. I don't want people swarming. They don't get it is supportive, but it's also
not you.
Yeah, like your support is not the support I'm wanting right now. In terms of everyone, I'm sorry. That's triggering. So for me, I felt being removed and making decisions of who I would interact with felt more comforting. The friends who know me, you sending an uplifting message, you bringing me food, like having those touch points.
Yes.
That was the support, and it was more tangible for me at the time. So I think Christianity.
Were you willing to talk about it then?
With certain people, but I was processing at the same time. So I used to do, and I think I was sharing this with you when we had a conversation, I had this escapism mentality where I knew it was real, but then
You pretend.
I pretend it wasn't, and I would, strangely, maybe not, but I would soothe myself by saying my mom's just on a long vacation.
She's gone somewhere.
She's gone somewhere. Yeah, just so I can sleep at night and so I can just function, right?
Yeah.
So it's that almost feels like moments of denial, psychosis almost, just, and then
But
peace,
I'm
knowing.
sure that was what kept you together.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's so
Coping mechanisms.
yeah. So
Yeah.
so we have somebody who is thinking, yeah, you can grieve a little, but don't immerse yourself too much into
Yeah.
it, so
Yeah.
it ruins you. And then we have somebody who looking at from a point of view where, you know, I love my mom so much. I watched her go through the routine, and I'm okay. I'm okay talking about it afterwards. And then we have you talking about, you know, I'm in denial, and I need to escape the people and this and the whole situation. And so we have different things running right here, you know, and it's interesting. Did you run away from people coming to visit and all these crowd and stuff? Was that something you?
No, I was very happy for the support. You need support when you're going through when you're going through grief. You need support. You know, don't underestimate the power of people being around you.
Yes.
And distracting your mind from, you know, what is involved in the whole process. I was listening to an audiobook on depression, and the author says that you can't stop thoughts from passing through your head, right? Whether you want to grieve or no, it's going to pass through your head, you know, and it's going to come at those moments when you just don't want it to. But you can choose to to treat it with the facts, right? You know what are the facts surrounding death based on your faith. I don't know how others cope with it, but when you know that when you believe in a resurrection, your attitude is different.
Well, Montie, I don't know, because when my son died, I literally went into a frenzy. And I believe in the resurrection. I believe in God. I believe in prayer. I believe in all these things. I love the people around me because they distract me. But there were times when I was looking in that grave in my mind. I'm trying to see my kid in that grave. I'm like, what's going on under there? Was he really dead? Did we make a mistake? Schizophrenia. I think it took me over. I think I went bizarre. You know?
Could it be where you see the person and your interaction and them acutely being taken away? Or, for example, from my perspective, it was a gradual decline and you had the time
I don't care.
to
This was my
process.
first time
so this
with-
is what I'm saying.
Yes.
The difference with an acute scenario, you stepped away just for 2 hours and then bam, you have to deal with the fact he's no more, versus maybe 6 to 8 months of seeing a decline.
I don't know.
You don't
I
think
don't
it
know.
would
I
be
can
this-
only speak to my situation, and I know
But
that
that's
like,
what probably
I don't know.
makes it-
We were having this conversation, and we were looking at some of the things that happens to us as a result of this passing, and we talked about some of the realities that we face with having lost a loved one. And you were saying that you send your mother on a vacation in your mind. What else?
Yeah, and even like, I mean, obviously there's moments, right? There's grief is this, it's waves. So there's times where you're almost at peace because you're like, whoa, you went through it. You were in a lot of pain. I know you weren't in the best, like it's quality of life.
Yes.
Ultimately, right?
Care.
So there's that, but it's not all peaceful. Even as a believer, it's not a peaceful time. And there's triggers even now to this day where I'm like, what? Come on, Elise. You're a mess for the smallest little thing. So
brush
give yourself
yourself up.
enough grace for that as well. That's what I've learned.
Is there a timeline? Are we supposed to cut off this grief
No.
after 5 years? Then say, okay, you're doing 5 years now, and you're
Approaching,
doing 10 years,
Plus,
10 plus.
I'm doing three.
Yeah. Plus.
Who's to say? What are we supposed to cut off?
There's no cutoff point, but it's not. I'm not saying that there's. You should. I'm not suggesting though that you should keep on embracing the grief. I don't know. There's what you call a cutoff point. It has happened. it's a reality that you live with. You don't succumb, however, to emotionally at all times to it, because as I said, you have to take care of your own mental health. And you talk about the grieving process, if you want to call it that, but there's also a survival process. You have to think, I have my family, I have my kids. If I dwell on that and my sons keep looking at me, there are times when Daniel died, I was having worship the Friday evening, and I was going to break out in tears, and I saw my 2 boys around me, and you know, probably I can't afford to let them keep falling. One of my sons, Nathaniel, he's very sensitive. Yes, very sensitive. You know, he can fall in empathy quick, and he's you know, I look at him. You know, Michael a little bit stronger. He seems probably a little strong like myself, but Nathaniel will get involved in your, you know, what is happening. The same with Daniel. Daniel was very sensitive as well. But so you have to be careful. You have to think about others around you while you're going through your process.
Why do I have to think about others around me?
Because others need to survive,
let's hear from the ladies. Do you need to worry about others around you in your grief?
Well, you mentioned the fact that we're gonna cope differently. So you're worrying about others around you is not to change how you're gonna respond, but to meet them at their need, and then that will redirect your focus in some sense, so that you're not dwelling, because the memory is there. So it's not gonna have a timeline, in my opinion. There's memories, so it will always come. For example, mommy, her sole goal was to take care of the kids. Now the kids are here and they're growing, and as they're growing, I'm thinking, what would your grandmother say right now? And what would she do? Would she even probably take you to Jamaica? How does that experience look like? And every time, like, Ophelia knew grandma, and she would ask, I have a picture there, and she's like, what about this? And I am still processing, like, how are you still trying to have a memory of a nana and you weren't even 1 yet? And so you might probably want to even not dwell, but this child is bringing back those thoughts, and so you're like, a balance is necessary. And so I had my sister. I had my sister. She was now going into grade 12. I had to be that strong arm to say, well, mommy was her lifeline. I'm not going to be mother, but I can walk you through what she would probably have guided us all in doing and proceeding left or right. And then I had our own family. I became pregnant again afterwards. And so the thought is always there, working and balancing. I sometimes reflect on how she would process things. So I would say, well, maybe I should probably get a second job because we need the income for this. How would mommy do it? So you don't even, it's not like you naturally,
the good things.
And you naturally gravitate to some strength from past strengths that they've exhibited to now go through your current situation.
Do you want to say something on that?
I feel similarly to you. Like, obviously, it's been 10 plus years. So now there's a different, I think I take on a new role in that experience has made me now super empathetic. Like, I am so hyper aware of emotions and people, and offering grace to people who are walking through things, and I'm grateful for that. Like, it's never, that loss was not in vain.
But Elise, your situation was complicated more recently.
Yes.
So how did one help you with the other, or did it?
Yeah, so recently I lost my stepmom. So that was also a very sudden, just even saying it right now, it's unbelievable that she's not here. And what's been so interesting with that is my stepbrother, so her son, who's older than me, has been leaning on me, like, I know you've been through this. And he's her only child. He's like, how did you do this?
Yes.
And I found myself being able to walk him through, or he's still dealing with it. But so I was like, wow, God, you're using me in a way I never thought.
Yeah.
I'm a shoulder for someone to lean on. We're experiencing the same loss.
Whereas before you were like a basket.
Before I wasn't any help to anyone.
Yes.
So it is that, I don't know, that's like that's a God thing.
Yeah.
Right? He just gives you the strength.
Well, I know Maria Daniels. I don't know. I forgot it today. His picture.
Yeah, I know you always
Yes.
hear that.
I'm
covering your mic.
I'm kind of surprised that I forgot to take it with me today, so that the audience could look at this picture. But I keep it everywhere I go. You know, everywhere I go, I have it in my room. You know, at all times, I want this vivid reminder that Daniel, you know, always has a place in my heart.
Yeah. So Monty, you never question God.
Question God. I question the circumstance. I have a distinct faith that God is all wise. There's much around us that we can't explain, but we look down the future. I've seen, and this is not to predict anything, but I've seen, you know, the flip side of people's experience. There are people who've grown their children, and while children are alive, they've brought a lot of grief to their parents. So it's not only when children die that they bring grief.
Yeah.
It's not only separation that brings grief. You're talking about the grieving process. There are people who are going through grieving process with their kids who are alive right now.
Okay.
There are kids who make choices that can make painful experiences.
Yeah.
So when you think of that, all things considered, God is all wise.
Yeah.
That's what I like to say.
Do you have a question, God?
I don't think I question him to why. Again, like I had a respect for mom's spiritual, spatial
Capacity.
Yeah. And so I remember at one point with the whole recognition that, hey, we have this illness to deal with. And I heard her talking to somebody on the phone and she said, pardon the language, Satan, give me a bitch licking on my gut. I said, why you empowering the man? I was nuts. I was like, why you doing that? I said, God, like, why you encouraging him, Satan, to say he had all right to do that? And I'm thinking, you gotta be.
I think we have to translate that for our viewers because I don't think half of our viewers really know what that meant. And I mean, it's just saying, can you?
It's almost as if she was acknowledging that this hurt.
The devil
is as
had
a
hit
result
her.
of, yeah, he. But I mean, if we even use the Bible, God said, "Go ahead and do whatever you want to do with Job," but He's not going to let
take
it go.
her.
Yeah.
And so again, like we can't separate the two in terms of the spiritual walk and the physical.
Okay.
It has to be married, and so it's not gonna be an easy, immediate understanding and analysis process. But if it's there, it will reveal itself at some point along the journey, because she was at the place already in my mind with that statement to say, if it comes to the point of death, I'm okay. And if it comes to healing, I'm even more okay. So how are we now?
I need your strength. I need your strength. Do you question God, Elise?
I did. I did
let's hear
question
it.
God. So I had to question God because I was the only one, in my opinion, at the time in my immediate surroundings. So I said, why is it that I'm the person who's not going to grow up with a mom?
Yeah.
Why is my mom not going to be around? That hits me just even saying that out loud. But I had to actually find, like, I came to be friends with a very close friend to this day, and she was like at that point an acquaintance. I had to seek that connection out for someone else who had walked through it, and that was like the other crutch. You know, you weren't walking it alone, because as much as friends were supportive, if you haven't walked through it, that I found difficult and questioning, well, why would I can't handle this.
Yeah.
I can't really do this.
Yeah.
So, but yeah.
And I find that as Christian men and women, we don't really want to talk about the fact that we have questions, because we're afraid of our Christian brethren and how they will react to our questioning. And for that, there are so many people who want to ask questions, but they're afraid because, you know, I said to my church sister once, I said, you know, sometimes I wonder if Daniel woke up and was looking for me and we had already put him in a box. And she goes, cut it out, cut it out. And right then and there, I knew this is not somebody
Yeah.
who I can,
Yeah.
Open to listening.
no,
Yeah,
this
that's-
is not one person who could say,
Right.
you know, my sister, I know
Right.
I know that you might be going through a lot right now, and maybe we will find some peace by just talking with God, and you know.
You know, I'm glad you mentioned that because there are people we talk to, and they think you're looking for answers.
Oh yeah.
They don't know that you just want to be heard, right? Not everybody who talks to you wants an answer.
True. Yeah.
They just want somebody to listen.
Yes, yes.
And that's who God is too. Oftentimes we probably even have asking God for answers, but God doesn't want to listen. And that's how we develop trust in God, because God is listening. And I know, you know, if God answers, you probably, you know. But, you know, God wants us to trust. It is the safest virtue a human being can invest in, is trust. When you trust, you are secure. Not for time only, but for eternity. It places you in a safe place. So if you know that God's a God who listens, even when He doesn't explain, you know, like mom who listens, or dad who listens, doesn't always explain, you can trust.
I like that. I think that is your wrap up, like your wrap up, you know, word to our viewers. So unless you have something else to add to it, I'll come back to you. But I'm going to ask Elise to, you know, tell us, how can we help those who are looking on, who are going through the grieving process? What word from the wiser can you give to our viewers?
Yeah, so I think similar to what Monty shared, it is a lot about not even the role as supporter. Your role is to listen, even to sit there as a person goes through it. Don't overthink the process. Being there for someone can look different. There are questions you can ask saying, how can I support you? Don't overdo, right?
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, the way you walk through the grieving process, number one, it takes a lot of prayer, I would say, but also just seek out the resources, whether they are in the church or outside of the church, to get that refuel and almost that just what you need to keep going. Because sometimes it is about, you have to get some therapy and you have to read the scripture at the same time.
Yeah.
That's true. And as you said that, I remember that, you know, when we were grieving, I had a group of friends.
Yeah.
There were those who never left my
Yeah.
house.
Yeah.
And they didn't even talk. They just sat there. You know, one particular person, she would just sit there and don't even talk, but she was there. I look around, she was there. My planning of my son's funeral, they were there. There was like Sean. Sean was like the silent night, but he was just there doing all these things in the background. And then there were those who would come and go bring the food.
Sure, yeah.
Cook the food.
Yes,
and
yes.
make sure we had what we needed. People bring food and things. I didn't even expect that, right?
Yeah.
People gave us money and stuff. So there's all kinds of support,
That's
right?
it.
Just, you need to reach out.
That's
and you
it.
need to be the support you can be,
Yeah.
right?
The wider picture, I think, for me, I reflect on not necessarily the memories. What sometimes bother me is how are her friends doing? She had very tight relationships,
Right.
and they were spiritual. They were, you know, like secular friends she had from undergrad years all the way up to now. And so I would look and think, how are they processing? I experienced them coming and visiting her when she was in the hospital, and they're like, this is not the Dawn I know. I don't want to see her like this.
Yeah.
And to this day, I always reflect, how are they coping? And I'll pray, because you don't know how to bring up the conversation if you should. And so I'm not saying in our personal, my space right now, I don't, you know, reflect on it. I was listening and I'm thinking, even if you had an experience with somebody dying before, it's not the same as your body.
Grieve differently
for each
It's
people
true,
that
yeah,
pass. So
yeah.
I can't necessarily throw that out there to say, well, if you see somebody that passed before, then you know how to manage that one right in front of you. It's
No.
a different relationship altogether. So prayer, that relationship that you personally have with the Creator, is gonna help you to ask the questions. You're gonna have to talk to Him real, like just find a little closet and spill the beans, because you need to get it out.
Cry if you must.
And if you don't hear the answer right away, just keep talking, like you keep praying.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It will come, because it's a genuine release of, I can't do it. It's just so overwhelming, but someone, and I know a Creator exists, will. And so the coping during and after is to say, I'm not going to be able to do it all on my own. I'm not going to be able to have all the answers. Life goes on, and I know I will have the necessary resources to take it every day.
Yes.
All right.
So
Ooh.
I like to close with this. Before you close, you have a lot. Questions invite more questions.
Yes.
And that's one of the reasons why we have to be careful lest we become. I'm thinking about those who will one day have to deal with the same issues. And I want to safeguard some of those who eventually lose their lives because of others who have lost their lives.
Oh, okay.
And so it's important that we think about those who don't know how to deal with this thing. So we can ask the questions, but they can open up more questions, and therefore we need help. We need to get the support of those who've been there. And another important thing, support those. Support those when you're going through your own grief. Look for others who are going through the same experience and support them.
So you're talking group support, group grief support, and you're talking to a counselor, talk to a friend, talk to someone who's been through it before. Just generally speak out and let your voice
Could it
be
even
heard.
be a way to
Well, those who
deflect?
need you, probably there are those who need you more than you need others. You look for those and let them channel their energies into you,
Right.
and in so doing, you can cope with your.
Yours,
Yeah,
yes.
that's good.
More
That's
effective.
good. Yes.
Powerful.
Yeah.
Okay?
Wow. All right. So Monty took us out. I'm so thankful that you guys were able to talk about your stories of grief and grieving, and still be a little bit upbeat and energetic about it. It's really very heartwarming. So we've come to the end of Uncovering My Voice, and here we talked a lot about the grieving process and how we've navigated it. I really hope that you heard something that resonates with you, and I really hope that you are able to get some wisdom out of the things that we shared here today. Please let us hear your story. Put it in the comment, and like this conversation, share with a friend. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me on Uncovering My Voice.
Our pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank
you.
you. And so for me, for now, it's bye-bye.